My wealthy husband said I'd never survive without him. So I left his keys on the counter and walked out. 24 hours later, his boss was calling non-stop, his father was in a panic, and the bank wouldn't stop ringing. What did I do to make them all lose their minds? 3 hours earlier, he told me I was nothing without his money. Now I'm watching security footage of him pacing our penthouse, completely unraveling. But here's what he doesn't know. While he thought I was playing with cute stock apps, I turned his pocket change into millions. And that's just the beginning. You're about to hear how a so-called trophy wife dismantled a financial empire, one document at a time. Stick around, because the real twist comes when his own father realizes he picked the wrong woman to underestimate. You wouldn't last a week without me. Mila, Ashton set down his crystal tumbler, the amber liquid catching light from our chandelier. Without my money, my connections, my protection, you'd be nobody again. Just another pretty face waiting tables or answering phones. He straightened his tie, clearly waiting for me to beg, to cry, to promise I'd never leave. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out my keys. House key, Range Rover key, safe key. I lined them up on our granite counter, each one clicking against the stone like a final period on a sentence. You're right, I said. Let's find out. The color drained from his face as I walked toward the door, leaving everything he'd bought me behind. 3 hours later, I sat in the lobby of the Ritz-Carlton, watching the security footage on my phone. Yes, I had access to our penthouse cameras, another thing Ashton never knew I understood. He was pacing our kitchen, picking up the keys, setting them down, calling someone. Probably Nathan, maybe his father. Definitely not the police, because what would he say? My wife left her keys and walked out. The concierge approached with a gentle smile. Miss Hawthorne, your suite is ready. My maiden name felt strange when I'd made the reservation that morning, but it was mine. The one thing Ashton couldn't buy or sell or trade. I'd paid with my own money, 6 figures accumulated from what Ashton called my cute little hobby of day trading. He'd laugh at parties, telling people I played with stocks like other wives played tennis. Nobody knew I'd turned his initial $10,000 allowance into enough to live on for years. The suite was smaller than our penthouse, but infinitely larger in possibility. I set down my single suitcase, the one I'd hidden at my gym months ago, slowly filling it with essentials every visit. Ashton monitored our credit cards but never questioned gym trips. After all, trophy wives needed to maintain their value. My phone buzzed. 17 missed calls already. I deleted his contact, watched his number become just digits on a screen. The first voicemail played accidentally when I tried to silence it. Mila, this is ridiculous. Come home. We'll talk about whatever upset you. His voice had that controlled quality, like he was handling a volatile investment instead of a wife. By the 5th message, the control was cracking. You can't just leave. Half of everything is in both our names. You need my signature too. I deleted them all. The morning felt like a different lifetime. I'd woken at 6 as always, alone in our California king bed because Ashton had fallen asleep in his study again, surrounded by monitors showing after-hours trading. The coffee maker was already programmed. Despite what he told his friends, I'd learned to use every appliance in that kitchen. He'd claimed I couldn't operate a toaster at last month's dinner party. Everyone laughed, even me, the good wife who knew her role. I'd stood at our floor-to-ceiling windows, 23 floors up, watching the city wake. The silk robe he'd given me for Christmas itched against my skin. Designer label, wrong size, chosen by his assistant who thought all wives wore size 2. Today was our anniversary. He hadn't mentioned it once this week, but I'd stopped expecting him to remember after year 2. That's when I decided to organize his study, looking for our insurance documents. He was always particular about his space, everything arranged just so. The voice recorder sat on his desk, that little silver device he used for important thoughts. When I knocked it over reaching for files, it clattered onto the marble floor and started playing. His voice filled the room mid-conversation. She asked to see our investment statements yesterday. Laughter. I told her they were too complicated, lots of numbers. He actually believed me. Nathan. I could get her to sign over her kidneys and she'd just ask what pen to use. My hands had trembled as I picked it up. Saw the date. Last Tuesday, the day I'd brought him lunch at his office, surprising him with his favorite sushi. He'd seemed so pleased, introducing me to his new analyst as the beautiful Mrs. Whitmore. Now, I understood the smirk on the analyst's face. The recording kept going. That's why this type is perfect. Pretty enough for photos, dumb enough to control, grateful enough to stay quiet. My father taught me well. Marry beauty, rent intelligence. I'd placed the recorder back exactly where it had fallen, angled precisely how he'd left it. Then I'd found the insurance papers and something else. A folder marked prenuptial amendments. Documents dated last month, adding clauses about abandonment and forfeit of assets if I left without just cause. Already notarized with my signature forged, expertly so. Standing in that study, surrounded by evidence of his success and my insignificance, something crystallized. He wasn't just dismissive or cruel. He was systematic. I was an investment, and he was already planning my depreciation. The Ritz suite had a view of our building. I could see our penthouse from here, lights blazing as Ashton probably tore through his office looking for signs of what I'd taken. He wouldn't find any. I'd only photographed documents, only copied files to clouds he didn't know existed. The real theft would come later, legally, through the 50% of everything he'd put in my name for tax benefits. My phone rang again. Richard Whitmore, Ashton's father, calling personally. I let it ring, remembering how he'd introduced me at his last party. Ashton's wife. Pretty thing, isn't she? Like I was a coat or a watch, something to be appraised and approved. Margaret's text came through then. The secretary who'd served tea at every family gathering. Heard you left. When you're ready to talk, I have 40 years of information you need. I smiled, the first real smile in months. Ashton said I wouldn't last a week without him. But he'd never asked what I was doing all those hours he left me alone. Never wondered why his secretary knew my maiden name. Never imagined his trophy might have been taking notes. 7 days. That's all I needed to prove him wrong. After that, I'd take the rest of my life proving myself right. The keys I'd left weren't surrender. They were a declaration of war. And unlike Ashton, I'd already read all the terms and conditions. 3 weeks had passed since that night at the Ritz. I'd established a routine, morning trades from my suite, afternoon walks through Central Park, evenings reviewing the documents Margaret had been feeding me in careful doses. Each file she shared revealed another layer of the Whitmore Empire's corruption, but today was different. Today was May 15th, our actual anniversary date. And despite everything, I'd agreed to one dinner. Just to discuss logistics, Ashton had said on the phone, his voice carefully neutral. We need to be civilized about this. The salon on Fifth Avenue was the same one I'd used throughout our marriage. Celeste, my hairdresser, worked her fingers through my hair with practiced precision. Special occasion? She asked, not recognizing the bitter irony. Anniversary dinner, I said, watching my reflection transform into what Ashton preferred. Sleek, controlled, expensive-looking. 4 years, right? How wonderful. Where's he taking you? Le Bernardin, his favorite, where the waiters knew his wine preferences and the chef sent complimentary courses to his regular table. I'd made the reservation myself, knowing he'd forget otherwise. The confirmation email sat in my phone, right next to the 17 legal documents my lawyer had prepared for tonight's real purpose. The dress had cost $8,000. More than most people's monthly salaries, charged to the credit card he hadn't frozen yet. Dark blue, his favorite color on me, though he hadn't commented on my appearance in 6 months. I studied myself in the boutique mirror. Every inch the perfect wife he'd curated, except for the flash drive hidden in my clutch containing 40 gigabytes of evidence. My phone buzzed as I was leaving the salon. Slight change, Ashton's text read. Nathan and Diana are joining us. Need to discuss the Singapore deal. Same time, of course. Our anniversary had become a business meeting. I sat in the back of the cab watching Manhattan blur past and type back one word. Perfect. He wouldn't catch the edge in that single word. Wouldn't notice it was the first time I hadn't added a heart emoji or a love you to my response. 20 minutes later, another text. Actually, father insists we come to the estate.
He's having something catered.
8 p.m. The driver had already turned toward Midtown. Change of plans, I told him, giving Richard's address in Westchester. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was wearing a dress worth a small fortune to eat dinner at the house of a man who'd never bothered to learn my last name before it became Whitmore, Richards. A estate sprawled across 12 acres of manicured perfection. The circular drive was full of cars. I recognized Nathan's Bentley, 2 other hedge fund partners' vehicles. Even Graham Chun's new Tesla. This wasn't a change of plans. Patricia answered the door, Richard's third wife, younger than me at 28. Her smile held the kind of exhausted recognition I'd seen in mirrors lately. Mila, you look stunning, she said, though her eyes said something else entirely. Why did you come? The foyer opened into the main sitting room where Ashton held court, tumbler in hand, his third by the color in his cheeks. He glanced at me, taking in the dress, the hair, the effort, and turned back to his conversation without acknowledgement. Nathan waved. Diana sat apart, nursing a martini with the dedication of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. The lovely Mila. Richard boomed, appearing from his study. He kissed my cheek, reeking of cigars and bourbon. Though I hear you're being not so lovely lately. This separation nonsense, bad for business. You understand? Margaret appeared with a tray of champagne. Her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, enough for me to see she knew exactly what this was. As she handed me a glass, her fingers brushed mine. Some anniversaries, she whispered, barely audible, are about endings, not beginnings. The dining room had been set for 12. I recognized most faces. Business partners, their wives, even Ashton's lawyer, though that realization came later. They'd orchestrated this entire evening to pressure me back into line. I sat in my designated seat between Nathan and Graham's wife, facing a portrait of Richard's father, the original Whitmore who'd built this empire on insider trading and strategic marriages. Dinner arrived in courses. Somewhere between the soup and fish, Ashton started his performance. Funny story about how Mila and I met, he announced, though no one had asked. The room turned toward him with practiced attention. She was at the Milken conference, completely lost. Wandered into a derivatives panel thinking it was about art derivatives. He paused for laughter that came too readily. She asked if hedge funds were about landscaping investments. Literally thought we were discussing garden hedges. The story was fiction. I'd been at that conference presenting my graduate thesis on market manipulation in emerging economies. But that truth didn't fit his narrative of rescuing a beautiful fool. Thank God for lost puppies, Nathan added, raising his glass. They make the best pets. Diana's hand found mine under the table. A gesture meant to comfort, but her pity felt worse than the insults. I squeezed back once, then excused myself. Powder room, I murmured. Though everyone knew women didn't powder anything anymore, Richard's study door stood partially open. His computer screen glowed, forgotten in his rush to play host. I slipped inside, memorizing everything. The desk layout, the wall safe behind a terrible reproduction of Monet's Water Lala, the filing cabinet marked private.
His password was written on a post-it note stuck to his monitor.
Richard 31936. His birth year and his favorite Shakespeare character. These men thought they were so clever. Through the window, I could see the dinner table. Everyone laughing at something. Ashton was standing now, gesturing with his wine glass, playing the role of successful husband to perfection while his actual wife stood in shadows gathering intelligence. When I returned, the conversation had shifted to business. Singapore expansion, leverage ratios, risk assessments. The wives sat silent, ornamental, while the men discussed millions like monopoly money. Then Nathan, drunk enough to be cruel, made his pronouncement. You know what Ashton is? He's an empire builder. And Mila here, she's the trophy case. Beautiful, elegant, but ultimately just for display. The laughter that followed had an edge. Like they all knew the joke cut deeper than intended. Ashton raised his glass. Best investment I ever made. Great tax benefits, minimal maintenance. And she appreciates and value at all the right social events. Margaret was clearing plates, her movements deliberately slow. Our eyes met across the room. and in her gaze I saw 40 years of accumulated rage. 40 years of watching women like me be diminished, discarded, replaced. Her slight nod told me everything. She'd heard it all, recorded it all, was ready when I was. Something inside me shifted. Not broke, but crystallized hard and clear as the diamond on my finger that suddenly felt like a shackle. The diamond on my finger caught the light as I walked out of Richard's estate that night. Each facet throwing rainbows that felt like tiny promises of revenge. In the car, I pulled out a cheap flip phone from beneath the passenger seat, purchased with cash at a bodega where they didn't ask questions. My fingers typed out a simple message to the only number saved. Tuesday, 2 p.m., Jade Garden, Chinatown. Margaret's reply came within minutes. I'll bring tea. 3 days of waiting felt like 3 years. I maintained my routine at the Ritz, ordered room service, made small trades to keep my mind sharp. Ashton had stopped calling. His lair was handling everything now, sending formal letters about reconciliation in the interest of financial stability. Each letter went straight to my shredder, then to Patricia Kim, my new attorney who lived 2 hours away in Connecticut, where Ashton's connections meant nothing. Tuesday arrived, gray and humid. The Jade Garden sat squeezed between a funeral home and a shop selling knockoff handbags, its windows fogged with decades of steam from dumpling baskets. No one from Ashton's world would ever find themselves here. Which made it perfect. Margaret was already seated in the back corner wearing a cardigan despite the heat, looking like someone's grandmother who'd gotten lost on her way to church. But her eyes held 40 years of carefully documented fury. Mrs. Whitmore, she began. And I cut her off. Hawthorne. I'm using my maiden name now. She smiled, pushing a tin of butter cookies across the table. The tin looked ancient, with flowers painted on top, the kind your aunt might use for sewing supplies. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, lay a lipstick tube. Twist the bottom 3 times, then pull, she instructed. The lipstick was actually a flash drive. 16 gigabytes of what Margaret called insurance. I started collecting in 1982, she said, her voice barely above the restaurant's din. Richard's first wife, Elena. She knew something was wrong with the books, asked me to watch, to listen. Then she had her accident. Margaret's fingers made air quotes around the last word. Single car, perfect weather, failed brakes. After that I kept everything. Every memo, every call transcript I could access. Every mistress paid off with company funds. Every filing that didn't match internal documents. The waiter brought tea and we fell silent until he left. Margaret poured with steady hands. Though I noticed the slight tremor when she mentioned Elena, the second wife, Carolyn, she lasted longer. Smart woman, MBA from Wharton, started asking the right questions in year 4. Richard had her committed for exhaustion. She signed the divorce papers from a psychiatric facility. Gave up all claims to avoid indefinite treatment. My tea went cold as Margaret outlined 2 decades of financial crimes. Each one meticulously documented on that tiny drive. But she saved the worst for last. Your husband isn't just complicit. He's been grooming Nathan's wife, Diana. There's a paper trail. Flowers charged to shell companies. Hotel reservations that align with his supposed client meetings. He's planning to leave you, Milla. But first, he needs to destroy your credibility. That anniversary dinner, they were all witnesses to your unstable behavior. Walking out, leaving your keys, they'll paint it as a breakdown. The dumpling basket arrived, but neither of us touched it. I was thinking about Diana's hand squeezing mine at dinner, wondering if her sympathy was real or part of another game. That night I sat in my hotel room with my laptop. The flash drive loaded, scrolling through Margaret's evidence. It was overwhelming. 40 years compressed into folders labeled by year, by crime, by victim. But I needed more. I needed Ashton's own records to corroborate everything. Patricia Kim answered my call on the second ring despite it being nearly midnight. I need to create a company, I told her. Something that sounds like nothing that could be anything. When? Tomorrow. That's a rush job. It'll cost. I'll pay triple. 2 hours north on I-95. Past the exits for Greenwich and Stamford where Ashton's colleagues lived in their own marble prisons. Patricia's office occupied the second floor of a building that also housed a dentist and a tax preparer. No marble, no modern art. Just diplomas on the wall and a coffee maker that had seen better decades. She'd already drawn up the papers. Phantom Rose Holdings LLC, incorporated in Delaware. Registered in Connecticut, with a business address that led to a PO box that led to another LLC that led nowhere. The structure is completely legal, she explained, sliding documents across her desk. But complex enough that tracing it would take months of dedicated forensic accounting. By then, you'll have accomplished whatever you're planning. How do you know I'm planning something? Patricia leaned back, studying me. Because women who pay triple for a shell corporation don't do it for fun? They do it for survival. A week later, Ashton left for Singapore. 5 days of meetings about expansion into Asian markets, he'd said. Though I knew from Margaret's intelligence that he was really setting up accounts I'd never be able to touch. The housekeeper, Maria, seemed relieved when I told her to take the week off. Paid vacation, spring cleaning, I explained. I need to do this myself. Alone in our penthouse. I became someone else. Not the trophy wife, not the ornament, but a forensic archaeologist excavating evidence of my own destruction. Ashton's office password was embarrassingly sentimental. Our wedding date, as if that meant something to him beyond a tax advantage. His computer opened like a confession booth. Folders within folders, trades timestamped to the minute showing clear patterns. Richard would have lunch with certain executives. Within hours, Ashton would make trades in those companies. The pattern was so obvious once I knew to look for it. In his locked drawer, the one he thought I didn't know about, lay correspondence that made my stomach turn. Not just about Diana, but about me. Emails to Nathan discussing my mental fragility. Suggestions that I might need professional intervention. Plans to have me evaluated by a psychiatrist, Richard Noy. One who testified in Caroline's commitment. My hands stayed steady as I photographed each page. Uploaded each file to Phantom Rose Holdings' encrypted cloud storage. Every document went back exactly where I'd found it, aligned to the millimeter. Ashton would return to an office that looked untouched while I held copies of everything that could destroy him. The final document was in his personal safe. He'd hidden the combination in a book about Warren Buffett, thinking he was clever. Inside, beyond the cash and gold coins, was a single folder marked Exit Strategy. Not for trades or business. For me. A timeline showing when to file for divorce, how to claim abandonment, which assets to hide first. My elimination was scheduled like a merger, complete with profit projections. I photographed it all, then sat in his leather chair looking at the city lights below. Somewhere out there, Margaret was probably filing her own reports. Patricia was setting up the next phase of corporate structures. And Ashton was sleeping soundly in Singapore, dreaming of empires built on the bones of women who trusted him. He was wrong about one thing, though. I wasn't just another trophy in his case. I was the one holding the hammer. The next morning I returned to my routine at the Equinox on Park Avenue. The pool was my sanctuary, 50 laps where the world dissolved into chlorine and rhythm. I was pulling myself out of the water when Diana appeared. Her workout set pristine but her face haggard, dark circles poorly concealed under concealer. Nathan knows, she said without preamble, glancing around the empty pool deck. About Ashton's messages to me. He hired a private investigator, had our phones cloned, water dripped from my hair onto the marble tiles. Why are you telling me this? Because whatever you're planning, and don't insult me by pretending you're not. These men don't just get angry when cornered. They get even. She pulled her oversized sunglasses down, revealing a bruise along her jawline, carefully covered but visible this close. Nathan's already moving assets offshore. Richard's been making calls to judges he golfs with. They know something's coming. Before I could respond, she was gone, her heels clicking across the wet floor with purpose. I sat there, chlorine burning my nose, wondering if she'd been sent to test me or warn me. With these people, kindness and cruelty often wore the same mask. That evening Ashton came home carrying calla lila, my least favorite flowers, though I'd mentioned it only once 3 years ago. He brought roses for every occasion since, when he remembered occasions at all. The lilac meant something. They meant he was paying attention now, thought we could have dinner together. he said, setting them on the counter where my keys once lay. Like we used to, we hadn't eaten together without others present in 6 months. I watched him pour wine, the good Bordeaux he usually saved for clients, and arrange cheese on a plate with unusual care. His hands, normally so steady when signing million-dollar contracts, showed the slightest tremor. "I've been thinking," he said, settling across from me at our dining table that seats 12 but had never hosted a family meal. "We should take a vacation, just us. Maybe that place in Montana with no cell service. Remember how you loved the mountains?" I'd mentioned loving mountains once on our honeymoon while he'd spent the entire trip on conference calls. The fact he remembered felt like a trap spring-loaded with teeth. "When?" I asked, cutting a piece of cheese with surgical precision. "Next week, or sooner." "Tomorrow even?" His eagerness betrayed him. "You seem stressed, Mila. The separation, living in hotels, it's not good for you." He pushed a document across the table. "New insurance papers," he explained. "Better coverage for both of us." His eyes tracked my hand as I picked up the pen, watching for hesitation, for signs of suspicion. Under the table, my phone captured every page. Patricia Kim's app running silently, storing images in Phantom Rose's encrypted cloud. "You trust me, don't you?" His question hung between us like a chandelier about to fall. Completely, I lied, signing my name with the same hand that had documented his plans to destroy me. 3 days later, my mother arrived from Ohio. Her presence announced by Ashton himself picking her up from JFK, something he'd never done before.
He carried her luggage, complimented her new haircut.
Asked about her garden with feigned interest so polished it gleamed. "Oh, honey," she gasped, pulling me aside in the kitchen while Ashton mixed her a gin and tonic with the precise ratio she preferred. "You didn't tell me things had gotten better." He seemed so devoted. The words I wanted to say piled up behind my teeth. "He's performing." "Mom, this is a show where you're the audience and I'm the prop. And somewhere there's a finale that ends with me institutionalized or dead." Instead, I smiled. He's full of surprises. That week became a masterclass in Ashton's abilities. Broadway shows he'd previously called a waste of time. Dinners at restaurants he'd booked months in advance, though I knew his assistant had pulled strings that morning. A surprise spa day for both of us while he handled some business. Mom glowed under the attention, tears actually forming when he toasted her at dinner, calling her the woman who raised such an incredible daughter. I watched from across the table as he performed the role of perfect son-in-law and realized with cold clarity that I'd never actually seen Ashton try before. This was him at full power. The charm that had built his empire, directed now at convincing my mother that her daughter was safe. The final night of her visit, she sat on my bed in the guest room, holding my hands. "Honey, you've lost weight. And your smile, it's different, practiced." Her fingers found my cheekbones, sharper now from months of barely eating. "Are you happy?" Behind her, through the doorway, I could see Ashton's shadow in the hallway. "Listening, I'm exactly where I planned to be." I said loud enough for him to hear, ambiguous enough to be true. After Mom left, Margaret texted about meeting somewhere new. The New York Public Library's reading room, where she volunteered teaching literacy to immigrants. The irony wasn't lost on me. She was teaching people to read while surrounded by the city's most powerful illiterates. Men who never read The Human Cost of Their Contracts. She spread newspaper clippings across the worn wooden table like tarot cards, revealing my future. Elena Whitmore, 1994. Drove her Mercedes off a bridge. Perfect weather, no skid marks. Carolyn Whitmore, 2003. Institutionalized for exhaustion. Divorced while sedated. Vanished after signing papers. Jennifer Whitmore, 2015. Accused of embezzlement she didn't commit. Bankruptcy. Last known address, shelter in Detroit. Now look at these. Margaret placed 4 photographs in a row. Elena, Carolyn, Jennifer, and me. All blonde, all between 5'4" and 5'6". All with the same delicate bone structure that photographed well at charity events. Richard picks them, she said quietly, mindful of the students around us. Like casting calls. Young, beautiful from middle-class families impressed by wealth. Just smart enough to be interesting, not smart enough to be dangerous. Marry them to Ashton, use them for appearances, then dispose of them in year 4 when they start asking questions. Why year 4? Long enough to establish patterns of instability. Short enough that no real bonds form with the social circle. By year 5 you're either gone or broken. She touched my hand, her skin paper thin but her grip strong. You're at 4 years, 3 months. Whatever you're planning, Mila, do it now. Elena waited too long. Carolyn fought too openly. Jennifer trusted the wrong people. I stared at the women who'd worn my name before me, their faces blurring into a single warning. What happened to you? I asked Margaret. Why did you stay? She was quiet for a moment, organizing the clippings with librarian precision. I was Richard's first secretary's daughter. When she died, he offered me the job out of kindness. I was 19, grateful, stupid. By the time I understood what I was documenting, I was trapped too. A different kind of trap, but still a cage. Now I'm 62, invisible, and very, very patient. The students around us packed up their books. The library announced closing time. As we stood to leave, Margaret handed me one last photo. A young woman, beautiful, blonde, probably 22. Who's this? Madison Hayes. Richard had lunch with her father last week. She just graduated from Penn. Engagement announcement expected within 6 months. Margaret's eyes held 4 decades of rage, compressed into laser focus. She's the next you, unless we stop them now. Madison Hayes' photo burned in my pocket as I left the library. 22 years old, whole life ahead of her, about to walk into the same trap that had caught 4 women before her. I tucked the picture into my wallet behind my old student ID, the one from before I became Mrs. Whitmore, when I still had my own name and my own dreams. The next morning I initiated the first withdrawal. $8,000 from our joint checking. Enough to look like furniture shopping, not enough to trigger Ashton's attention. The bank teller didn't even blink. Mrs. Whitmore buying expensive things was as routine as morning coffee. I converted it to cash at 3 different banks, then deposited it into Phantom Rose Holdings account in Connecticut. Patricia Kim had shown me how to create a paper trail that looked like interior design consulting fees. The IRS loves documentation, she'd said. Even if it's properly filed fiction. That evening Ashton came home at 9 instead of his usual 7. His tie was loosened, jacket off, scotch already on his breath from whatever bar he'd stopped at between the office and home. I was in the kitchen making myself tea, when he stumbled slightly at the doorway. Lost the Morrison account today, he announced, pouring himself 3 fingers of scotch, though it looked closer to 4. $40 million in assets gone. They said there were concerns about compliance. Can you believe that? Compliance concerns at my firm. I kept my face neutral. Though I knew Margaret had sent anonymous tips to Morrison's compliance officer 2 weeks ago, that's unfortunate. I said, watching him drain half the glass in one swallow. Nathan thinks someone's talking to our clients. He poured again, his hand less steady. Says there are rumors about INSEC investigation. Ridiculous. The next day I moved 12,000. The day after 15. Spa treatments, I told the one teller who asked. My husband wanted me to pamper myself. She smiled knowingly, probably thinking of her own husband, who never noticed such expenses. Ashton's drinking escalated in perfect proportion to his losses. Every night brought a new crisis. Another client pulling funds. Another partner asking questions. Another rumor about federal involvement. He'd stand in his study, calls on speaker while he paced and drank, signing whatever I brought him without reading. Power of attorney adjustments, insurance modifications, trust amendments. His signature got sloppier with each passing day. Patricia called Thursday morning from a number I didn't recognize. Can you meet today? Urgent. I found her at a rest stop on I-95, sitting in her sensible Honda, looking like any other suburban lawyer except for the tension in her shoulders. The FBI contacted me, she said without preamble. They know I represent you. They want to talk. My chest tightened. How did they? Richard Whitmore has been under investigation for 18 months. A former employee named Dennis Chin filed a whistleblower complaint. They've been building a case, but they need someone with inside access to corroborate. She handed me a business card. Agent Sarah Coleman. She specifically asked for you. Did you tell them anything? Attorney-client privilege. But Mila, if you're going to move, it has to be now. Once the FBI goes public with their investigation, all assets will be frozen. Everything you haven't moved will be locked in litigation for years. That night, I watched Ashton pour his sixth drink before dinner. His phone rang constantly. Nathan, Richard, lawyers, crisis managers. Each call made him drink more, sign more. Suspect everyone except the wife quietly refilling his glass. Maybe you should eat something, I suggested. Playing concerned spouse while calculating how much longer his liver could take this pace, not hungry. He muttered, then looked at me with bloodshot eyes. You've been different lately, calmer, therapy. I lied smoothly. Learning to accept what I can't change. Saturday arrived with the monthly ladies' auxiliary meeting at Riverside Country Club. I'd been dreading it. Knowing Helen Brennan would be there with her coterie of wives who'd made sport of diminishing me for 4 years. But Patricia's news had lit something inside me. A timer counting down to when I could stop pretending. Helen started before I'd even sat down. Mila darling, still playing with your little investment apps? So cute when wives have hobbies like children with toy kitchens. The room tittered with practiced laughter. Margaret stood in the corner pouring tea, invisible as wallpaper. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. Actually, Helen, I said, my voice carrying across the room. My portfolio is up 340% this year. How's yours doing? Silence fell like a guillotine. Helen's face went from patronizing to shocked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. I'm sorry, what? She managed. 340%. Would you like to see the statements? I particularly enjoyed shorting your husband's pharmaceutical company last month. Made a killing when their patent got rejected. You did know about the patent rejection, right? Helen's face went white. She hadn't known. Around the room, other wives leaned forward, suddenly seeing me as something other than Ashton's pretty accessory, though I suppose. I continued, stirring sugar into my tea with deliberate calm. Some of us prefer real kitchens to toy ones. And some of us prefer real portfolios to pretend ones. Margaret actually smiled. Not much, just a slight upturn of her lips as she refilled my cup. The meeting continued in strange silence. The usual gossip replaced by careful glances in my direction. By evening, Ashton would hear about this. By morning, Richard would know his daughter-in-law had claws. But I didn't care anymore. The timer was running down and I was tired of being underestimated. The explosion came Wednesday. I was in my hotel room when my phone lit up with notifications. Diana had filed for divorce from Nathan and she'd brought receipts. Not just infidelity, 3 mistresses over 2 years, but financial fraud, hidden accounts, and a particularly damning email trail where Nathan discussed removing Diana from the equation with his lawyer. Ashton called me 17 times in an hour. I answered on the 18th. What did you tell her?
He demanded without preamble. Tell who?
Diana. Nathan thinks I leaked information to her. He says you two were friendly at dinners that you must have. I told her nothing, I said truthfully. Diana had found her own evidence, fought her own war. We were parallel soldiers who'd never compared notes. Through the phone I could hear something crash in his office. He's pulling out of the fund. 20 years of partnership gone. He says I betrayed him for a woman.
His laugh was bitter broken.
Wasn't even interested in Diana. She's too old, too smart. I was just keeping options open. The admission should have hurt, but I felt nothing. I just made a note in my phone. Evidence Patricia might need later. You always thought you were smarter than everyone else. I heard Nathan screaming in the background. Well, congratulations. You've destroyed us both. The line went dead. Ashton didn't call back, but Margaret texted an hour later. Richard called an emergency meeting. All partners. The empire is cracking. I stared at Margaret's text for a full minute. The words glowed on my screen like a prophecy finally coming true. My hands moved without conscious thought, pulling a red wig from my closet, purchased with cash 3 weeks ago from a costume shop in Queens where they didn't ask questions. The dress was polyester, off the rack from Target, something Mrs. Whitmore would never wear. Dark sunglasses completed the transformation into nobody, anyone. Someone who didn't exist in the Whitmore's world. Nathan's office building on Madison Avenue had the kind of security that looked impressive, but was mostly theater. I'd been there dozens of times as Ashton's wife. Knew the guards rotated lunch breaks at 12:30. Knew Nathan's assistant Sarah always took 45 minutes to grab sushi from the place 3 blocks over. The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt endless. In my purse, a manila envelope held printed screenshots of every message Ashton had sent about Nathan. The mockery, the contempt, the detailed plans to steal his clients once the partnership dissolved. But the real poison was at the bottom. Ashton's financial projections for acquiring Diana after her divorce, complete with calculations about her inherited wealth and how to access it through marriage. Nathan's office door was solid mahogany with his name in gold letters. I slipped the envelope underneath, heard it whisper across his Persian rug, then walked back to the elevator without rushing. The security camera would show a woman who could be anyone, walking with purpose but not urgency. 3 hours later, Margaret forwarded me an email from Ashton's assistant. Partnership dissolution letter received from Nathan Chin, effective immediately. Legal team requesting emergency meeting. The Warwick Hotel on 54th Street still accepted cash if you had enough of it. I registered under Mila Hawthorne, my maiden name feeling like armor I'd finally remembered how to wear. The room was small but clean, with a desk where I set up my laptop and the burner phone Patricia had given me. The CC whistleblower hotline answered after 12 rings. First, an automated system. Press 1 for this, 2 for that, like reporting financial crimes was as simple as ordering pizza. Finally, a human voice. Securities and Exchange Commission Enforcement Division. I need to report systematic insider trading at Whitmore Capital Management. I said, my voice steady as marble. I have 5 years of documented evidence, including timestamp trades that correspond with material non-public information. The agent, she said her name was Jennifer Liu, stayed quiet while I laid out everything. Richard's lunches with executives followed by Ashton's perfectly timed trades. The shell companies, the offshore accounts, the pattern so clear a child could follow it. She asked technical questions that revealed she understood exactly what I was describing. Why are you coming forward now, Mrs. Whitmore? I looked out the window at Manhattan's skyline, all those towers built by men like Richard and Ashton. Because I finally understand that staying silent makes me complicit. And because they're planning to do to another woman what they did to me after the call, I took Margaret's 40 years of evidence, copied onto 3 separate drives, and placed one in a safety deposit box at Chase, one at Bank of America and one in Patricia's office safe. The instructions were simple. If anything happened to me, release everything to the FBI, the CIA, and the New York Times simultaneously. That evening, Richard's black Mercedes pulled into our building's garage. I watched from the penthouse window as he emerged, his face tight with something between fury and fear.
He didn't bother with the doorman.
He had his own key, the privilege of a father-in-law who owned 30% of his son's fund. Where are your books? Richard's voice carried through the penthouse before he'd even reached Ashton's study. Dad, what? The books, Ashton. Now, I made myself small in the kitchen, preparing coffee with deliberate normalcy while their voices rose and fell through the walls. My phone, recording everything, rested against a vase on the hallway table. Picking up every word. Nathan's out, Ashton was saying. But we can manage without him. Nathan's out. Morrison's out. Chen pulled everything this morning. The FBI was at Chun's office asking questions about our trading patterns. That's impossible. Everything we do is bulletproof. Until someone started talking. Richard's voice dropped dangerously. You promised me the wives were handled. Saad Mila was too stupid to understand what she was signing. She is, Ashton insisted. She doesn't even know how to read a financial statement. I entered with the coffee tray, my face perfectly blank, the devoted wife serving drinks while her world discussed her like furniture. They both looked at me. Richard with cold assessment, Ashton with dismissive certainty. Cream? I asked Richard. He ignored me, turning back to his son. Find the leak. Fix it or we're all finished. They worked until 2 in the morning. spreading papers across Ashton's study like tarot cards that might reveal their future. I heard the printer running constantly, documents being shredded. Calls to lawyers who charged $2,000 an hour to answer phones at midnight. By 3. Ashton had passed out in his chair, surrounded by evidence of his crumbling empire. His head rested on a stack of contracts, drool pooling on papers worth millions. The mighty financial genius reduced to an exhausted man who'd built his throne on the bones of women he'd underestimated. I moved through our penthouse one last time. Not with nostalgia, but with the clinical efficiency of someone already gone. My clothes stayed in the closet. Let him explain to people why his wife left everything behind. The jewelry remained in its boxes, blood diamonds and gilt gold that had never truly been mine. In my purse. My laptop, my real identification, and the banking information for Phantom Rose Holdings, which now held exactly 50% of our liquid assets. Legally withdrawn over the past weeks. The keys went on the granite counter where this had all started. House key, car key, safe key lined up with military precision. Next to them, a single note on my personal stationery, the expensive kind he'd bought to make me look the part. Check your accounts. The doorman didn't question why Mrs. Whitmore was leaving at 3 a.m. with only her purse. In their world, the rich did whatever they wanted whenever they wanted.
He'd probably seen stranger things. The October air hit my face as I stepped onto the street.
Cold and sharp and absolutely perfect. Behind me, 23 floors up, Ashton slept in his chair, unaware that his wife had just fired the first shot in a war he didn't know had already begun. In 6 hours he'd wake to find his accounts frozen and the FBI closing in. The Uber driver asked where to, and for the first time in 4 years I gave an address that was entirely my own. The Uber dropped me at the Warwick Hotel just as the sun began painting Manhattan's glass towers gold. I paid cash, walked through the lobby without looking back, and took the elevator to my room on the 12th floor. From my window, I had a perfect view of our building. Ashton's building now, I supposed. I ordered room service. Eggs Benedict, fresh fruit, coffee strong enough to wake the dead. The normalcy of it felt surreal. At 6:52, I opened my laptop and watched our joint accounts online. Knowing the banks would notify Ashton the moment they opened at 7. At 7 exactly, I refreshed the page. The accounts showed the automatic divisions Patricia had filed weeks ago, triggered by my official change of residence. $17 million redistributed according to New York State matrimonial law. Half of everything, just as the prenup he'd insisted on had specified. The same prenup he thought protected him but actually guaranteed my rights to marital assets. My phone, placed face up on the white tablecloth, lit up at 7:03. Ashton's photo appeared, the one from our wedding where he looked invincible. I let it ring through to voicemail. By 7:15 he called 9 times. I turned on the voice recorder, playing each message aloud to the empty room. First message. Mila, what's happening? The bank just called. There's some kind of error with our accounts. Fourth message. This isn't funny. Call me back. We need to fix this before the markets open. 11th message. What did you do? What did you do? 19th message. Please. Whatever you think you're accomplishing, we can work this out. You don't understand the position you're putting me in. 20-8th message. The margin calls are hitting. I can't cover them without those funds. You're destroying everything we built. 30-5th message. Mila, please. They're freezing everything. The FBI is here. God, please answer. By noon, his voice had devolved from commanding to begging. The 47th call came through as I was finishing my second cup of coffee. This time I recognized the number.
His lawyer, not him. Mrs. Whitmore, this is James Kellerman.
Your husband has retained me to discuss the irregular movement of marital assets. We need to ... hung up and blocked the number. Then I called Patricia. They're panicking, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Everything we did was completely legal. Those assets were jointly owned. You had full withdrawal rights, and we followed the letter of the law. He can contest it, but it'll take months. And by then he'll have bigger problems. That evening I was eating dinner in my room. A perfect piece of salmon I could actually taste now that my appetite had returned, when my phone buzzed with a news alert. I turned on the television, flipping to CNN. The footage was beautiful in its brutality. Richard Whitmore, the man who'd built an empire on other people's losses, was being led from his Westchester mansion in handcuffs. His silver hair was disheveled, his usual armor of expensive suits replaced with a wrinkled shirt. FBI agents carried boxes of evidence past the cameras, each one containing Margaret's 40 years of patient documentation. Federal authorities arrested hedge fund mogul Richard Whitmore this morning, the reporter announced, following a years-long investigation into insider trading, tax evasion, and wire fraud. Sources indicate multiple whistleblowers provided crucial evidence, including detailed records spanning 4 decades. My phone lit up with a text from Margaret. Just a champagne bottle emoji. Margaret, who'd never sent an emoji in her life, who'd served these men coffee while documenting their crimes, had finally seen justice arrive at Richard Whitmore's door. 3 weeks passed in strange peace. I met with FBI agents, provided testimony, and watched the news coverage from my hotel room as the empire crumbled in real time. Nathan fled to Switzerland. Graham Chin pled guilty immediately, hoping for leniency. Other partners turned state's evidence, racing to sell each other out for reduced sentences. Then on a Thursday evening, Ashton found me. I was sitting at the Ritz-Carlton bar drinking champagne I'd bought with my own money. Money earned from trades I'd made while he thought I was playing with cute apps. He looked like a ghost wearing an expensive suit. Unshaven, hollow-eyed. His jacket wrinkled like he'd slept in it. "You destroyed everything," he said without preamble, standing too close. Whiskey on his breath, I turned on my bar stool, met his bloodshot eyes directly. "I revealed everything. There's a difference. You had a life. I had a role in your performance." I took a sip of champagne, letting the bubbles settle before continuing. "You said I wouldn't survive a week without you. It's been 21 days and you're the one who looks like he's drowning." He reached for my wrist, his fingers closing on air as I pulled away. "You don't understand what you've done. My father's facing 20 years. The fund is gone. Everything is ... Everything is exactly what you built it to be. A house of cards." I just stopped holding my breath, his face contorted, anger replacing desperation. He raised his voice, drawing stares from other patrons. "You stupid ... The bartender, a woman about Margaret's age, stepped forward. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. Do you know who I am?" Ashton demanded. "Someone who's disturbing our guests," she replied calmly. Security arrived within minutes. 2 men guided Ashton out with professional efficiency while he shouted about lawyers and lawsuits. The bartender returned to her station, polished a glass, and set another champagne flute in front of me. "On the house," she said. That was long overdue. 2 days later, Diana and I were called to testify on the same day, though we'd never coordinated. She looked stronger than I'd ever seen her, no longer the wilting flower at dinner parties. We sat in the courthouse hallway, not speaking but understanding everything. Margaret's testimony came last and lasted 3 days. She brought receipts for everything. Every bribe, every threat, every woman they destroyed. She spoke about Elena's accident, Caroline's institutionalization, Jennifer's manufactured bankruptcy. She presented 4 decades of evidence with the precision of someone who'd been preparing for this moment her entire life. "Why did you keep all of this?" the prosecutor asked. Margaret adjusted her glasses, looked directly at Richard where he sat at the defendant's table. "Because I knew that someday someone would be brave enough to use it. Someone like Mrs. Hawthorne." The prosecutor looked confused. "You mean Mrs. Whitmore?" "No," Margaret said firmly. "I mean Miss Hawthorne." She took back her name. She took back everything. That night, Patricia called with news. "The prosecutor says Margaret's evidence alone guarantees convictions. Richard will never see freedom again." Ashton's looking at 15 to 20. I stood at my hotel window looking out at the city lights. All those towers that would keep standing long after the Whitmore empire had turned to dust. The towers looked smaller from Patricia's office window. Or maybe I was just seeing them differently now. She slid the final divorce decree across her desk, a document that weighed nothing but changed everything. The judge's ruling came through this morning, she said, unable to hide her satisfaction. The house 60% of remaining liquid assets. Plus your separate property remains untouched. The courtroom had been packed 3 days earlier. Ashton sat beside his lawyer wearing the same suit he'd worn to our wedding, though it hung loose on his frame now. Stress had carved away his golden boy polish, leaving someone I barely recognized. His lawyer, Kellerman, had tried one last desperate play. Mrs. Whitmore benefited from these alleged crimes. She lived in luxury and enjoyed the proceeds. Patricia stood smoothly, pulling out her laptop. Your Honor, I'd like to play a recording from Mr. Whitmore's personal voice recorder, dated 14 months ago. Ashton's voice filled the courtroom, clear and contemptuous. She wouldn't understand the financial statement if I drew her pictures. That's the beauty of marrying someone decorative. She's too stupid to ask complicated questions, Judge Catherine Chin. A woman who'd probably heard every variation of this story looked directly at Ashton. Mr. Whitmore, it appears you were quite wrong about your wife's intelligence. Perhaps if you'd been less convinced of her stupidity, you might have been more careful with your crimes. Now, holding the decree, I signed my name. Mila Hawthorne, on every line Patricia indicated. Each signature felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd forgotten existed. The whistleblower reward should clear next week, Patricia added. Between yours and Margaret's, you'll have more than enough for your plans. Margaret was waiting in the lobby wearing a new suit. The first time I'd seen her in anything but servant's clothes. We walked 2 blocks to the building where Ashton's fund used to operate. The directory in the lobby still had a blank space where Whitmore Capital Management had been listed. 3rd floor, Margaret said, pressing the elevator button. The landlord gave us a deal. Apparently having a foundation for abuse survivors is better PR than having empty offices. The space was modest. 4 rooms that had once been a dental practice. But the windows faced east, catching morning light. And there was something poetic about building our future above Ashton's ruins. Phoenix Foundation. Margaret read from the temporary sign we'd hung that morning. Rising from ashes. Our first client arrived that afternoon. Jennifer Chin, wife of a pharmaceutical executive who'd been doctoring clinical trial data. She clutched a folder of documents like a life preserver. My husband says I'm paranoid, she whispered, looking between Margaret and me. Says I wouldn't understand the science anyway. Margaret leaned forward, her 40 years of experience compressed into absolute certainty. Every document tells a story. Mrs. Chin, we're going to help you write a new ending. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, my mother called. I'm coming to visit, she announced, not asking. I need to see my daughter. I'd moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn. Smaller than the penthouse by far, but full of windows and light. The kitchen was cramped but functional, and I'd been teaching myself to actually cook, not just heat things up. Mom arrived with 1 suitcase and 1,000 questions she was too polite to ask. I met her at JFK myself, driving my own used Honda, reliable, practical. Invisible in traffic, you look different, she said, studying my face as we sat in airport traffic. Younger somehow, lighter. That week we didn't talk about Ashton or the trial or the money sitting in accounts I could access but rarely touched. We talked about the foundation, about Margaret's dry humor, about the women who came to us carrying secrets like stones. I cooked Thanksgiving dinner. Turkey that was slightly dry, stuffing that was perfect, cranberry sauce from a can because some traditions deserve to survive. Mom watched me move around my kitchen, comfortable in my space in a way I'd never been in the penthouse. You're happy, she said, not a question but a revelation. I'm free. I corrected, then reconsidered. Which might be the same thing. She stayed an extra week, sleeping in the guest room I'd painted sage green, reading books while I worked on foundation cases. On her last night, she hugged me the way she used to when I was small. Before I learned to perform happiness instead of feel it. I'm proud of you, she whispered. Not for surviving him, but for becoming yourself. 6 months had passed since I'd walked out of the penthouse. Spring was arriving in Brooklyn, and I stood in the doorway of the house. My house now, though I'd only returned to sign the final papers. The rooms echoed with absence. Ashton's things long since removed by movers his mother hired. My phone rang. Margaret, her voice energized in a way that 40 years of silence never allowed. "We have a new client," she said. Senator Williams's wife has been documenting campaign finance violations for 2 years. I looked at the keys in my hand. The ones I'd taken back, the ones I'd left, the ones I'd earned. They were heavier now, weighted with purpose instead of revenge. Through the window I could see Madison Hayes walking past with her new fiancé. Not Ashton, who was serving 3 to 5 in minimum security, or any Whitmore man, but someone her own age who held her hand like it mattered. "Ready for round 2? Margaret asked. I thought about the 17 women who'd come through our doors in just 3 months, who had successfully left their marriages with their assets intact. 13 were still gathering courage and documentation. Each one learning what I'd learned. That freedom isn't granted, it's taken, one document at a time. I was born ready. I told Margaret, closing the door on the empty house. I just didn't know it until someone tried to convince me I was nothing. The lock clicked with finality. I walked to my Honda, tossing the keys to the estate agent who'd sell this monument to Ashton's ego. The proceeds would fund the Phoenix Foundation for another year. Maybe 2. As I drove back to Brooklyn, back to my smaller, warmer life, I thought about Elena, Carolyn, Jennifer. The ghosts of wives past who'd walked this path before me. They'd been broken or silenced or erased. But their stories, preserved in Margaret's careful documentation, had saved me. Now Margaret and I were saving others. One signature at a time, one woman at a time, building a bridge out of the ashes of the empire we'd burned down. My phone buzzed with a text from Diana. "Coffee tomorrow? I have someone you should meet. She needs our help." I smiled, merging into traffic, heading home. My real home. Not a cage with a doorman and a marble counter where I'd finally set down my keys and walk toward this moment. This life, this freedom that looked exactly like I'd always imagined it would. Unremarkable, undramatic, and absolutely mine.